Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Broadband Universe podcast. I'm Craig Corbin, and it is a pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Rob Griffin, Tribal Broadband Leader for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. Rob, welcome.
Thanks, Craig. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. This is perhaps an understatement, but a very interesting time in the world of broadband. So much has transpired. We had a chance to visit at Fiber Connect just a couple of weeks ago in Nashville. Great to see you. Before we get into any of that, there may be some folks out there who would love to know a little bit about your background and your role as the tribal broadband leader with the Choctaw Nation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I love to. I'm the tribal broadband director for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. This is an area that is 100,000 square miles located in far southeastern Oklahoma, and it's the third largest tribal nation in the United States. And I was very fortunate and very grateful to be able to go work for them almost 4 years ago. Prior to that, I've been working for several companies across the last 25 years, all in telecommunications and technology. And ever since I got started back in 1994, the goal has been to always get better internet connectivity to either a residential home or a business or a state, federal government, and tribal governments the last 7 years specifically. So that's what I've been doing. I've seen a lot of bandwidth go up in the last 30 years, and I've seen a lot of applications. I think technology is better today than ever. I see the cycles of advancement going faster and faster. And to me, when I look at what's happening over the next 10 years in terms of what somebody can do at their business, at their home, and be able to take advantage of all that. I mean, it's just a great time to be doing this.
You know, you have been a part of the leadership that has put forth a very ambitious broadband strategy. And when we talk about the amount of territory that will be targeted, that 11,000 square miles, that's a lot of territory to deal with. Talk about some of the projects that will help make that reality.
So what we've been doing for the last 2.5 years is tracking where we are in terms of coverage. And about 4.5 years ago, we were at 60 something percent, 62%. And our goal by our chief was that we reach above and beyond 80% coverage at 25/3, which is the old FCC standard. We're now at 100/20. So we're accelerating our path to get there, and we feel really comfortable in hitting that goal. And one of the things that we have to do is we have to build relationships with 14 carriers and growing
Mhm.
over the last several years and into the future. And we're very fortunate because when we build these relationships and have that communication, we're able to get funding not only for ourselves, but help assist through support and resolutions to help other entities get funding. So when you look at the area, it is vast. There's a lot of terrain. About half of it is rock and granite, and it's very difficult and very expensive to build fiber optic networks in that location. And then we've got half of it that's pretty flat and easy to build into. And so, with all this work that we've done, myself and others at the Choctaw Nation, we've been able to help support get close to $800 million in funding to build out fiber optic networks and fixed wireless networks. So when you take all that together, and then the areas that have been awarded are completely spread out and are primarily areas that were unserved or underserved in the past. And then now with the new standard, the new technology, we look to really be able to support future growth for not only our reservation, our tribal nation, but all the communities throughout.
That is fantastic. Congratulations on being able to have put together that kind of funding. That is tremendous. I know there are always challenges in that process, and many times there are hurdles when it comes to filing applications, the multiple systems that go along with that. Talk about how you've been able to navigate and assist in navigating those processes.
Yeah, Craig, so that is really difficult. When you're working with multiple government entities, you have to adhere to whatever NOFO that comes out from each one. And so, what we've decided to do in the past is go with some very specific grant writing organizations
Mhm.
that have a particular skill in helping tribal nations in rural America. And when you do that, you get to accelerate your ability to fill out these applications, to gather the information, and then get it submitted on time. Now, when we do that, we also work hand in hand many times with government agencies to look at the service area. We find out what areas have been funded in the past so that we can avoid those double funding. And what happens then is we're able to move into a way that we can adjacently build networks and take advantage of the existing network, build our own network. And it gets more difficult the longer we go, because the longer that you go, the harder it is to find these areas
Sure.
with the number of people needed to build a really good application. And I think, what's happened here is we've seen a lot of carriers come into the area that are being very competitive. They want to build in addition to their existing network. So we help find those companies, and then we support them through support letters, tribal resolutions, and we give them some ability to see what we're trying to do in the future as well.
Nice. Being able to assemble the project from the funding standpoint is a huge aspect. The actual construction is huge. You touched on something earlier in the conversation with respect to the difference geographically, topographically there, and that's always interesting. But once you've gotten the network completed, many times folks look over the fact that you got to maintain that. There's a long term commitment to that, and something that does not come easily.
You're right. Once you put that fiber asset in the ground, then you really have to look at how you're able to maintain that, because, we all know that once you get fiber in the ground, it's good for 30 plus years.
Mhm.
And somebody has to make sure that the maintenance stays up, because as businesses and homes have shifted to the level of importance where this is a standard utility now that they rely upon every day. So if there's a repair that has to happen, if there's an upgrade in the network that has to happen, then that has to be planned and somebody has to pay for that. All the government funding doesn't pay for any of that. So you have to be able to build a business case to help support that. In some cases, and in our case, we're taking on some of that maintenance on our own
Right.
through putting together a budget for that. We know that the carriers have that as well. So one of the things that we can do is we can look at the different vendors and carriers and their equipment and who's out there. And in many cases, we've seen very good partnerships where a carrier might have a technician that's certified in an area, and they can help support the maintenance long term of another network that we might be building. We also are able to work on agreements that when we need somebody that has to come in, let's say there's a shortage of fiber technicians, then we've got additional training support from several companies across the US that can come in. We put inside the grants the dollar amounts to train fiber optic technicians. So once we find the right person to fill that role, then we can send them off to get trained. They can come back and they can either work for us, they can work for another carrier, but then they are able to grow and develop into a very good industry, an industry that's been around a long time, build a lifestyle for themselves and their family. And then, of course, we look for them to become the trainers going forward.
What a tremendous investment in their careers. That is phenomenal, because that is so important. And I think that will grow. That aspect will grow in importance as we move more into the future. I'm always interested too, from the standpoint of making reality, connecting folks and bridging the digital divide. There is an engagement with tribal members that is part of that effort. How has that been made possible through the efforts of you and your team?
we have to communicate in such a way that we utilize our existing channels of support.
Hmm.
So, one thing that is not necessarily unique to the Choctaw Nation, I see this in other tribal nations across the US. We already have ways that we're working to train and support our members. So for instance, we have 17 community centers and we invested in building fiber directly to those community centers back in 2019.
Hmm.
And when we did that, we then have the ability to support that area. Because when you put 17 community centers over a large area like we have, which is about the size of Massachusetts,
Hmm.
you've got to realize that people may want to interview for a job, but they can't travel all the way across the reservation to go interview in person. So we have set up video conferencing facilities. We help with the interview process. A lot of times they don't know how to use the internet to even get into the interview. So that has been able to transition into our training long term. So, somebody that's just getting used to the internet nowadays is able to get further training to be able to connect to the internet. And, there are things that we also do as a tribal nation. When you have small towns and communities, they
Hmm.
may not have the personnel to
Yeah,
be able to understand how the rest of the economics of the world works.
sure.
So we may go in and teach them how to get more access to tax support dollars by the use of receiving funds through Amazon or online delivery. So there's a lot of ways. So we're pretty fortunate. We get to take advantage of the existing communication infrastructure. Sometimes that's just person to person, but
Right.
then now as we get everybody trained on the internet piece, that just helps enhance that.
That's fantastic. Also curious, Rob, regarding the business interactions that the Choctaw Nation and you in particular have had with providers, vendors across the spectrum in the world of communications, engaging with the Choctaw Nation. How have you found those relationships evolve, and how best can vendors prepare themselves for success in that strategy?
So, Craig, as you know, there's a lot of different sizes of carriers out there.
Right.
And, the bigger ones are a little bit harder to work with, but we've built, and, these relationships take time, right? We spent a lot of time with them. The smaller carriers tend to be a little bit more flexible.
Hmm.
And, things that happen that were able to help us are, let's take a look at where you're building your network tomorrow. And then when you build that network, if it interlaps with our network, then we can create business opportunities for them and for the Choctaw Nation to where there are wholesale agreements put in place. We can make alterations to network design as we go along.
Hmm.
So, even though we might not be able to get fiber to the home in every area, we might be able to get fiber to a tower. And so if we can get fiber to a
Right.
tower and then serve that area, that just means that they're going to have better internet forever
Sure.
and long term. So what happens is these relationships, it takes time to build that with the trust.
Yeah.
And of course, we all know that trust between tribal nations and the
Yeah.
government and corporations, that is a fragile entity sometimes, and it has to hold up. Now, we are very fortunate. We have a lot of business owners, and in the second part of that is it has gotten a lot more competitive. We have small towns like Stringtown, Colgate, many towns that support businesses like Atoka, where businesses from out of state are coming to these small towns
Hmm.
now. And the first requirement is to have good internet. So when then a business from out of state starts to look at a small town in southeastern Oklahoma, and there's 2 or 3 fiber to the home providers there, there's an extended fixed wireless network in the area, and it's starting to grow. That's a prime area for businesses to come into. So it's just a lot of, I think we could take the strategy that we're going to be the only provider in town, but instead we've decided to work with everyone. And I think that helps everybody get better.
Which probably strengthens too the long term economic viability and growth for those towns that you're talking about. You're watching the Broadband Universe podcast, brought to you by Utopia Fiber, built by communities for communities with blazingly fast speeds you can rely on. My guest today, Rob Griffin, the Tribal Broadband Director for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And Rob made mention early on in our visit today, we had a chance to catch up with each other during Fiber Connect, put on by the Fiber Broadband Association, record-setting event again in Nashville. It was great to see you. I'm always curious about what you took away from that event. There was so much great content.
There was so much content, I couldn't get to it all this time. And, this is probably one of the first shows that I've been to where I just thought, okay, I could be there 2 more days and still gather information and data. And the greatest part about Fiber Connect is that you're not finding just vendors, you're finding people that you haven't talked to all year, except maybe online. And so you get to see them face to face. And, one of the things that the Fiber Broadband Association did is that they came to me as the tribal co-chair, and we started having a discussion at last year's Fiber Connect. Mm-hmm. How can we start to build a tribal track? And so Gary and Richard and Marisa and everybody got together and said, let's put this agenda together so that if a tribal nation comes to Fiber Connect 25, they will be able to select just one tribal track, and then it will be they will have the ability to go to each session and it doesn't overlap. Nice. And so that's what FBA did. They created a tribal track. And with that, we were able to get many more tribal nations to come to Fiber Connect knowing
Nice.
that. So the year before, we probably had about 18 tribal nations that attended in 24. In 25, we had nearly 32 tribal nations that attended. 35 were represented across the U.S. and Canada. And when you do that, then we had a tribal working group session for over an hour that we're able to just talk about tribal nation challenges that we have to try and overcome. And so since they are unique, we were able to have that in a closed chamber and help each other. And then we follow up with monthly calls that we talk about other engagements, and we just continue that process. And so when you have a tribal nation that's new, they're trying to learn, they're going through the process, or if they've been doing this for 15 years, like many of them have, then they're able to get involved.
How wonderful to be able to share the knowledge base and best practices, especially with those that are more new to the world of broadband. We would be remiss if we did not touch on what transpired within a week of when we are recording our session today, and that being the updated guidance from NTIA that has created a lot of interest, a lot of work for folks all across the nation. Within the next 90 days, state broadband offices with new requirements to deal with. Just from a 30,000 foot perspective, your thoughts on your interpretation of that new guidance?
I get that things had to change so that they could go faster. Mm-hmm. What I don't like is that the changes aren't based on technology. They're based on making things go faster. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the ability to connect in rural America, and you see the impact this will have specifically for tribal nations. So today, if you're on a tribal nation, there's a 23% chance you have access to no good internet connection. Mm. If you don't live on a tribal nation and you're in rural America, you only have a 7% chance. So you can see that there's a variation depending on if you're on a tribal reservation or not. Now, what that also means is when the digital divide is in place and it starts to get bigger and bigger, that wideness, that area of difference gets bigger and bigger as well. And now with this change in the BEAD preference, and if we're moving away from a fiber preference, then there's going to have to be some change from the carriers to be able to invest in those areas. Because we all know that in our case today, that when you put fiber in the ground, you have not unlimited bandwidth, but you can put terabytes of data across that. and you can do it at amazing fast speeds. And the only thing that keeps it from not going faster than your 1 gig, you see the 10 gig, you see the 50 gig connections coming out, that's the limitation of the equipment in the
Yeah.
market. That's not the limitation of the fiber.
Right.
Now, when you look at a fixed wireless solution, then you start to look at the limitations, because if you're looking at unlicensed spectrum, wireless backhaul, towers that don't have access to fiber, then the areas that are served by those type of solutions become very limited in what applications are out there. And so when all of the companies start building these applications, and you've got to remember, the speed at applications is not a linear concept. It's much faster than that. So it continues to speed up faster and faster over time, and especially with AI kicking in. And what was once a narrow gap on tribal nations will continue to be a wider gap if they're not served by fiber.
Yeah. And something you touched on earlier in our conversation, the fact that when you do put fiber in the ground, you've got at least 3 decades on average, sometimes much more, that you can count on that infrastructure to be the method of delivery for their service. So it will be interesting to see how it all plays out. Much will transpire in the next 6 months, no doubt. And we will watch with great interest. As we begin to wind down our visit today, Rob, always curious to know, as you look into the future, especially given what has transpired now with how BEAD is evolving, but not BEAD only, but other opportunities for growth in the world of broadband. What do you see as where we'll be 5, 10 years down the road from today?
That's a big guess, Craig.
Yeah. Yep.
It's really hard to say, but I think that with the ability and the connectivity is going to get better, right? The technology from the equipment side is going to get faster, and the speeds supported will go up and up. And when you think about virtual reality, you see the things that are happening in the movie, and I really want to focus in on training. When you think about your ability to train at a remote location, if you can have direct live interaction and the bandwidth keeps you from getting tired of doing that for more than 30 minutes or an hour, and you're able to do that for several hours a day, then I think the people out there in the field, no matter what discipline that they're in, you can have better training throughout. So you're not having to depend on people from just tier 1 cities or the bigger cities. You can start to depend to get people trained out in remote areas. And I think as more people want to get trained in different areas, jobs are evolving every day. They're going away from, those high-tech jobs into different disciplines, and you have to be smarter about what you're doing and what you're investing in. But I think the types of jobs, the types of opportunities out there are just going to continue to grow, because I think people, once you challenge them, and it doesn't even matter what age you are anymore. Once you get challenged, and if you want to work and provide something for your corporation, your family, your community, you can do that, and it's just getting better every day.
I love that. It's a great way to wrap up our conversation today. Rob, as always, a pleasure. So glad that I got a chance to visit with you in person at Fiber Connect. Look forward to the next opportunity to do so.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Yako.
Absolutely. And on behalf of Rob, thanks for letting us be a part of your day. We'll see you next time right here on the Broadband Universe. So long, everyone.